Welcome back. You're watching NewsX. Samudar Pratap Singh, External Affairs Minister S. Jaishankar, has addressed the 80th United Nations General Assembly yesterday, where he made some noteworthy statements. The first was condemning Pakistan and calling it the epicenter of terrorism and terrorist attacks being traced back to Pakistan. He did not name the country, but it was quite evident that the subject of his comments were Pakistan, as the Assembly lauded Jaishankar's statements. The External Affairs Minister also laid out India's key principles: Atmanirbharta, Atmaraksha, Atmavishwas. He talked about the tariff volatility and the need for the UN to expand its permanent and non-permanent membership as well.
India has confronted this challenge since independence, having a neighbor that is an epicenter of global terrorism. The most recent example of cross-border barbarism was the murder of innocent tourists in Pahalgam.
And joining us live now is Ambassador Veena Sikri, former diplomat. We have Adit Kothari, Foreign Affairs expert, also joining us now live. Madhav Nalapat, editorial director of the Sunday Guardian, is with us. Major General Sudhakarji also is joining the broadcast, geopolitical expert. Let me make a start with you first, Ambassador Sikri. What did you make of the External Affairs Minister's address at the UNGA and the areas that he focused on?
I think it was a very important address. It was a special occasion because this is the 80th UNGA session. So it's a special anniversary, 8 decades of UN's existence. But what really has it achieved? I think this was a key focus of External Affairs Minister Dr. Jaishankar's speech, that he focused on the achievement or the lack of it. You know, that is the UN able to meet the challenges of the world today. He highlighted the challenges of the world today, and I think among them, terrorism and the need to counter it. This was the very highest priority. You are quite right that without mentioning Pakistan, he said completely, frankly, what he wanted to say about Pakistan as the epicenter of terrorism, and his reference to cross-border barbarism, in the attack on Pahalgam, on the murder of the innocent tourists in Pahalgam, was absolutely pointed and correctly emphasized. And of course, he also spoke a lot about the global south. And I think this is a very important aspect, because today India is being seen more and more as the protector of the interests of the global south, as speaking up for them, as the voice of the global south. You know, India has already had several online conferences with leaders of the global south, summit conferences with leaders of the global south, and they really look up to India as representing their interests in the world. But when the UN is totally incapable of protecting these interests, and the whole concept of multilateralism is fraying at the edges, it's collapsing really, as the External Affairs Minister pointed out, with these two events going on, the Hamas-Israel conflict in the Middle East and the Ukraine conflict between Russia and Ukraine. These have really made a mockery of what the UN is and what it can do in this day and age to protect world peace. The point that External Affairs Minister began with, that the UN is not only built for the preventing of wars, it is there for building peace. And that is what the UN must focus on. But it has shown itself incapable of either preventing wars or of building peace, because the conflicts just go on and on. The UN is completely irrelevant in preventing them. Very often the Security Council cannot even adopt a resolution because one nation or the other among the P5 vetoes these resolutions. So the External Affairs Minister spoke strongly about the need of the reform of the multilateral system, the reform of the Security Council, increasing the number of permanent members of the Security Council. We know that India has been a great votary, a strong defender of this need, because the Security Council, built at a time in 1945, has totally outlived its structure and is unable to really take any decisions, even at the Security Council level, let alone in the UNGA. I mean, for example, look at this, that on the recognition of Palestine as a state. Of course, India has done it decades ago, but even the resolution in the UNGA passed by a majority of votes, it's not going to be implemented. How can it be implemented? There's no scope for implementation. And there is today a 21-point peace plan put together out by President Trump, but the Hamas says they have not seen that peace plan. So, good as non-existent. So I think that the concepts that you touched upon, Atmanirbharta, Atmaraksha, and Atma Vishwas, these really embody India's foreign policy and India's self-belief and India's focus in our internal affairs. Today, the very close interaction between internal developments and foreign policy is really significant. It was never like that before. But today, every Indian traveling abroad wants to know about the foreign policy of India towards the country that is traveling in, whether Indians are going to receive a welcome there, whether there's a problem of any kind. And we do see that even in America, that there's such polarization, complete polarization on the foreign policy that President Trump is following, and a complete division between the groups, because after all, in the elections last year, the vote was divided 51% and 49%. So it was very, very close. It was a great division right down the middle, as it were. So I think that external affairs ministers focus on the need to repair the system, and the need and how India looks at the system, and how India is ready to play its role. And this is it, because a lot of the countries in the world are looking to India today, even on Ukraine-Russia conflict. Everybody mentions to India, everybody turns to India. President Zelensky talks to our Prime Minister, President Putin talks to our Prime Minister. So I think that this effectiveness of India's role was highlighted. But the tragedy of what the UN has become 80 years after it was formed was really very much in evidence throughout our External Affairs Minister's speech.
Yes, Adit Kothari, what, according to you, were the main takeaways of the address? What stood out for you?
So Uday, I think one of the key takeaways was the sort of incisiveness of Dr. Jaishankar, where he highlighted the sort of inequalities within the UN's functioning. When he used the example of COVID and the pandemic to highlight, how travel bans were being imposed, how vaccination drives were being conducted on the basis of regional security. It highlighted, the global ineffectiveness to handle that sort of inequality. And from a mandate perspective, that was one of the primary failings of the UN. And that's when he sort of bought in, how India can play a much more effective role in voicing and lobbying the interest of the global South. Africa as a nation, as a continent, which has been largely unrepresented in the United Nations. Nobody really puts up their qualms, their issues, or issues which they are grappling with on a day-to-day basis. India has done that effectively, and he's shown, with the various projects that India is currently delivering, with I think 9 or 10 current projects that India is effectively engaging in South Sudan, in Congo, where our sort of staff and both our military and non-military staff are basically deployed to manage those kind of issues. So all in all, I think 80 years on, is UN an effective body? When we look at what's happening in Ukraine and Russia, what's happening in the Middle East, they have largely been ineffective in preventing those wars to break out, and largely been ineffective in controlling the breakout and management of those wars. I think so. From that perspective, I think he highlighted how Pakistan, despite being the epicenter of global terrorism, where people, countries from across the world are basically experiencing Pakistan-sponsored terrorism, but yet nobody really has the spine to call them out, univocally. So I think, largely a very diplomatic, but yet, kicking the political correctness into the bin kind of a speech made by Dr. Jaishankar.
Yes, let me also, in fact, quickly get in Professor Nalapat. Professor Nalapat, what did you make of the references by the Foreign Minister to terror, and also his calling out of our neighbor for their support for terror as well? Putting this on the global stage, what did you make of that reference and the other references made by the Foreign Minister on a variety of issues?
Look, let me focus on one point that the External Affairs Minister made, which is the large number of trouble spots in which Indian soldiers have put their lives on the line defending peace and that he named a long list of trouble spots, a long list of countries that have been in conflict, and where finally peace came. And there have been Indian peacekeepers. Everybody trusts the Indians. That is I mean, that is a subtle point that Minister Jaishankar was making. As far as Pakistan is concerned, quite frankly, Pakistan fell into his trap. Uh, Minister Jaishankar had made no reference whatsoever by name to Pakistan. He simply spoke about a neighbor of India, which could mean any of the countries around India. But Pakistan immediately jumped to its own defense. And after that, the Indian delegate was very quick to point out that, it is, we never named any country, and this country is immediately speaking out without being named. What does it indicate? It indicates a guilty conscience. So I think, quite frankly, on the whole, let me tell you that very little change is going to come. There will be no UN reform. There is not going to be a resolution of Ukraine. There is not going to be a resolution of Gaza uh, for the immediate future. But the fact of the matter is, it's important to understand each country's point of view. And that's where the UN is important. President Trump, for example, gave a very clear idea of his worldview in his address to the UNGA, which, by the way, the UN is an organization that he feels, does not need to exist any longer. If I'm not mistaken, he has sharply reduced the amount of funding the US gives to UNGA, and yet President Trump spent a very long time explaining the worldview, essentially, of President Trump. And it was very important to listen to that, to understand his worldview and to understand where he's coming from. But the only problem that we are facing in India, there has to be a clear perspective. There has to be a clear strategy. What is the strategy? And that is the missing question that is being asked. So I would only like to say that very courteously, very diplomatically, Minister Jaishankar pointed out the importance of the global south, the increasing relevance of the global south. I mean, he hosted the BRICS meeting, which, knowing that President Trump doesn't like BRICS at all, he hosted it. It was a gesture to show that India is not going to obey the rules set by other countries if those rules are conflicting with not only Indian interests but the overall global interest. So, on the whole, Uday, a very impressive speech. There's no doubt about it. The points made were one by one, excellently presented. But of course, I again repeat that I don't think very much is going to happen as a consequence of this speech or any of the other speeches at in this particular forum. Essentially, it's a talking shop to enable other countries to find out the worldview of the countries where the speaker is coming from, and I think, or rather, the worldview of the leadership of the countries that he or she is representing. And I think from that point of view, the UNGA is indeed relevant. And as for UN reform, I mean, when you see India, when you see Brazil, two very important countries excluded from the Security Council permanent membership, and you see countries represented there that were basically chosen way back when the UN was formed. And there we may point out it was not Communist China that is represented, it was KMT China. So if you look at the natural justice, that seat should not have gone to Communist China. It was not Communist China that got represented. But anyway, so the fact of the matter is that there are a lot of issues that India has with the UN, but I think India has been taking a very wise approach of dealing with the UN in a very diplomatic way and dealing with them and helping them to the extent it can and promoting peace wherever it can, whether it's in Ukraine, whether it's in Gaza. India has always called for peace, peace minus terror. And in the case of Ukraine, a mutually acceptable peace formula. I'm not sure the present leadership of Ukraine will accept that, but I think That's where I think Ukrainian elections are very important, and the sooner they're held and they're free and fair, the better. But having said that, Uday, I'd like to overall say it was a brilliant speech. Really,
Yes.
and no
Yes.
doubt that the Prime Minister acted
Absolutely.
correctly.
Major General Sudhakar ji, the address, of course, was all-encompassing. And do you believe it hit the nail on the head as far as the points it made on the issues of terror, economics, and geopolitics was concerned?
Good evening, Uday. Thank you for getting me for the show, and very sincere compliments to the esteemed and distinguished co-panelists that deserve to have the last say on the subject. Let me say, this is my analysis. I would compliment the Minister of External Affairs of India for a clarion call in simple, articulate, and very effective communication to the global order, wherein he reminded everyone of Sun Tzu's saying that tactics without strategy is like noise before the defeat. The global order is facing defeat. It's written large on the wall. And the clarion call not only included the economic disparity, inequality, but also highlighted issues related to trade barrier, non-tariff barriers, and the consequent protection to defending the protectionism by some of the countries. Also, without having said anything about one issue which I personally feel the call should have been given, that India has been singled out despite being on the right side of the rules-based international order and despite being a strategic partner of United States of America. This should have been loud enough to be called out from the portals of the United Nations General Assembly. I, as a soldier, I also feel very proud that he has done exceptionally proud to the nation and the global order by having highlighted that it's the order of the multipolarity and multilateralism which needs to be defended by one and all. And the center of his articulation remained the transborder terrorism, which world is resorting to double standards. The people who had been dropped like a hot brick a few years back have been taken on the lap and they are being nurtured. Let me remind one of the leaders of United States of America who said in Pakistan in 2013, if you are nurturing snakes in your courtyard or backyard, don't ever expect that they will continue to bite only the neighbor. They will turn around, bite you also, and bite others. So it's a strong clarion call and the reminder to the global order that let's wake up, unless you want to sleepwalk into the realm of defeat. Back to you, Uday.
Yes, let me, take that back across to Ambassador Sikri. Ambassador Sikri also, as once again, India reiterating the call for reform of the system of the US to make it more reflective of the global South and the changed world order. Will that message finally hit home? Will we finally see reforms? Does the UN also need to look inwards a bit?
Well, I think the prospects of reforms are very, very remote because President Trump himself, the US, the largest contributor to the UN budget, has no interest in the UN at all. And he has slashed down on funds. I don't think with the UN staff, the bureaucracy, the programs can remain funded at the same level as they are right now. So I think there is very little scope for reform there. But I do think that if you see our External Affairs Minister's statement at the UNGA, together with all the other statements he made during the meetings he had in New York, which was, which had the BRICS meeting, he had so many other meetings on which he was very, very frank and called out the hypocrisy and double standards of the world community who say one thing for themselves because they take unilateral action and then they impose penalties on other countries who want to follow their own policies. So I think all in all, our foreign minister's statements were very much a strong statement for multi-alignment. In this day and age when President Trump seems to be attaching the highest importance to his conclusion of what he called the big, beautiful deal with China, setting up the G2. And it seems to be something that President Trump has very much on his mind this time, quite different from earlier when he was totally absorbed in the partnership with India as one of the important partnerships to defend against what China was doing globally, multilaterally, and with the economies of the world. But this time, it's a very different picture. But India has to seek its own space and relevance in the world system as it is evolving, and India will remain committed to multi-alignment and will continue to be the voice of the global south. And this is an important direction that India is pointing out. That is why we have called out all the situations that are happening in the world, whether it is Ukraine or the terrorism situation, the barbarism, which is masquerading in the name of terrorism, but still that country is being supported by the US today. And the US, as recently as the 8th of September, has concluded a whole lot of deals with Pakistan on oil exploration, on critical minerals. And we saw when President Trump met Asim Munir and Prime Minister Shahbaz Sharif, he had a wooden box ready which was open to show all the critical minerals that are available in Pakistan. Small little pieces of these critical minerals were arranged in this box, and they were shown to President Trump as to what Pakistan is going to provide to America. So I think that, this is really a huge change and turnaround that India is facing. And we are keeping up to it very well, protecting our own interests, stating our interests in multi-alignment, and carrying out those interests by speaking to all the other groups. So his External Affairs Minister, Dr. Jaishankar's meetings showed in itself how India is continuing, absolutely single-mindedly with its policy of multi-alignment, whether it is the G20 or the countries of the South or the BRICS and other groupings, and we're going to continue with that. So it was a very important statement, declaration of what India's perspective is going to be in the coming months and years in the face of a complete change.
I'm afraid we've run totally out of time. My thanks to all of our guests for joining us on this discussion. Let's slip into a short break.
अगर आप